The Wild West was a strange place, or more accurately, it was a strange idea. Despite all of the imagery of tumbleweeds and 10-gallon hats, drunken duels, and whiskey-soaked saloons, the lawless frontier only lasted about 50 years. It never had clear borders, but it was somewhere around here. And yet, this rugged place has etched itself deep into American folklore. Today, this once unforgiving landscape looks more like this. So how did a land of outlaws and bounty hunters become a playground for the ultra-wealthy? And what can the endless sprawl of the American Southwest teach us about cities of the future, especially in a world that's getting hotter, drier, and more extreme? To answer that, we have to go way back. So let's travel back in time and explore the deserts of the Southwest, this time on Painting the Past. So if you've watched this series before, you know that I usually zoom in on specific moments that have left their mark on history. But for this episode, I want to do something a little different. I've spent a lot of time in the Southwest, and it never fails to captivate me. It's a striking blend of three cultures: Native American, Spanish, and American. The landscape is so stark, it always amazed me that humans managed to live there at all. But the more I dug in, the more it actually made sense. In fact, the cities of the Southwest might just hold the key to building successful cities in the future. And as we talk about the evolution of this region, I'll be painting the pinnacle of human audacity, a temperature-controlled pool at a luxury resort in the middle of the Sonoran Desert. So let's get started on this painting here. The first thing I want to mention about this painting is that it's a still scene. There's not a lot happening. There's a little bit of movement in the water, but even then, the water's quite calm. So when I'm thinking about a still scene, I don't need to convey action or movement. Instead, I want to convey a feeling. I want there to be a holistic feeling that comes across when somebody looks at this painting. In this case, I'm going to focus on trying to capture that warm desert heat. And to do that, I'm going to use a lot of layers of warm colors. The water will be cool, but pretty much everything else is going to be soaked in this sort of soft orange color, and that's what you can see I'm doing first. At the end, I hope what happens is you see this sort of depth of warmth shining through all of the materials and different colors and different aspects of the painting. The other thing I want to practice with this painting is a difficult skill to hone, which is the skill of not trying to recreate what you see in the photo, but instead trying to recreate how the image made you feel. And so to do that, I'm going to do my best not to worry if I get, say, a line that's out of place or a wobbly line or something that doesn't look photorealistic. I'm not going to try to fix it. I'm just going to leave it. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Let's dive into the history. The American Southwest sits atop some of the oldest exposed rock in North America. Parts of the Grand Canyon reveal layers over 1.8 billion years old. So over the years, shifting plates, ancient seas, and volcanic eruptions built a land of extremes, towering plateaus, deep canyons, and basins like the Sonoran and Chihuahuan deserts. In this hot, dry landscape, life adapted. Plants like the saguaro cactus and the yucca evolved to store water and resist heat. Animals like the kangaroo rat and the Gila monster survived with almost no water at all. So when early modern humans arrived around 12,000 years ago, they survived by studying seasonal plant cycles and following game tracks. Eventually, they began farming using water harvesting techniques to build some of the most resilient communities in North American prehistory. The Hopi of northern Arizona farmed and relied on rainfall and a deep knowledge of how the land held water. Around 300 AD, the Hohokam built vast networks of hand-dug canals, some stretching 20 miles, to divert river water near what is now Phoenix. The Zuni and other Puebloans used terraces, check dams, and stone basins to harvest rain and fight erosion. These weren't just survival tactics, they were sustainable systems honed over centuries of desert living. So if you visited the region, you may have seen the famous cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde or Chaco Canyon. So while they've stood the test of time, they were actually only inhabited for about 100 years. When droughts hit and resources ran low, the people just moved on. See, adaptability was the secret to survival in the Southwest. Adaptability was the tool that enabled native communities to prosper in this region. But all of that changed with the arrival of the Spanish, who brought with them not maps, but myths. By the 1530s, rumors were spreading throughout colonial Mexico of golden cities to the north. In 1540, Conquistador Francisco Vázquez de Coronado led a convoy north through what's now Arizona and New Mexico to find these mythical lands. So after 2 brutal years, including dozens of violent clashes, he returned to Mexico empty-handed. But he had opened the door, and in 1598, Spain returned, not just to conquer, but to colonize. Juan de Oñate led another expedition across the Rio Grande, and he claimed the land as the Kingdom of New Mexico. True to colonizers of his time, Oñate was a pretty awful dude. When villagers at Acoma Pueblo resisted Spanish demands for tribute, Oñate ordered a massacre. Hundreds were killed, survivors were enslaved, and men over the age of 25 had 1 foot amputated. A punishment so extreme that Oñate was actually convicted by the Spanish authorities later. But still, the Spanish remained. In 1610, they founded Santa Fe, making it the northernmost capital of the Spanish Empire. Franciscan missionaries soon fanned out across the region, establishing missions in Zuni, Hopi, and Tewa villages. They banned ceremonies, destroyed kivas, and punished anyone who practiced traditional religion. In 1630, Fray Alonso de Benavides wrote a letter bragging to the Spanish king. They burned their idols, renounced their errors, and destroyed their kivas, embracing the light of the holy gospel. In reality, resistance was growing. In 1680, a Tewa man named Pope, who'd once been imprisoned by the Franciscans, united over 20 Pueblo communities in a coordinated revolt. The villages counted the days by using knotted cords that he had distributed. So when the moment came, the Pueblos rose up, killing 20 friars and hundreds of settlers. They burned churches and they drove the Spanish all the way south to El Paso. For the first time in nearly a century, the Southwest was free of European control. Governor Antonio de Otermin, who fled Santa Fe, wrote, "All of the churches have been burned, and all signs of our holy faith effaced. The Indians no longer obey Spanish authority." Real news. For 12 years, Pueblo communities held their ground. When Spain returned in 1692, they were more cautious. The second wave of colonization was negotiated, not imposed, so missions were rebuilt. Some, like San Javier del Bac near Tucson, are still standing, but the Pueblos retained more autonomy. So while Spain was reestablishing its dominance over Pueblo communities in the early 1700s, a new power was rising just beyond the edge of their maps, the Comanche. Originally a Shoshone-speaking group from the northern plains, they acquired horses, thanks ironically to the Spanish themselves. And within decades, they transformed into a fast-moving, highly organized force that dominated the southern plains. So by the mid-1700s, the Comanches controlled a vast territory known as Comancheria, stretching from eastern New Mexico to central Texas and from southern Colorado into northern Mexico. So as the Comanches rose, Spain was faltering. Its empire was cracking. By the early 1800s, Napoleon's invasion of the Iberian Peninsula pulled Spanish focus away from far-off colonies like New Mexico and Arizona. Missions went underfunded, presidios were understaffed, and settlers were left to fend for themselves. Then came the final blow. In 1821, Mexico declared independence. Overnight, the entire Southwest became part of a new nation that struggled to govern its northern frontier. Indigenous raids by the Comanche, Apache, and Navajo were unchecked. Settlements were isolated, trade was sporadic, and military support was scarce. As American merchants streamed in via the Santa Fe Trail, Mexican authorities scrambled to maintain order. So what had once been an imperial outpost became something wildly different, a power vacuum filled with raiders, traders, and settlers. This was no longer Spain's domain, or anyone's really. It was becoming something wilder, something more fractured and more volatile. The seeds of the Wild West weren't planted by cowboys. They were sown in the chaos of collapsing empires. In 1846, after years of tension over Texas and territorial ambitions, the United States invaded Mexico, launching the Mexican-American War, a swift but brutal campaign driven by the idea of manifest destiny, which was the belief that the U.S. was meant to stretch from coast to coast. American troops marched into California, New Mexico, and deep into the Mexican heartland. When the dust settled in 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo handed over nearly half of Mexico's territory, including what would become Arizona, New Mexico, California, and Nevada. For the US, it was a triumph of expansion. But for the people already living in the Southwest, indigenous communities, Mexican settlers, and a few American settlers, it marked the beginning of a new and uncertain era. This was the era that gave rise to legends like Billy the Kid and Jesse James, that shaped the iconic imagery of John Wayne and spaghetti westerns. And more recently, this was the era that inspired Red Dead Redemption. Such a good game. But the myth of the Wild West has endured much longer than the West itself. See, in the 1880s, the railroads arrived and everything changed. Lines like the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, and the Southern Pacific streaked across the desert, connecting Albuquerque, Tucson, and Phoenix to Chicago, Los Angeles, and beyond. Suddenly, cattle could be shipped east, miners could send ore west, and settlers poured in, turning frontier strips into charming towns. Phoenix quite literally rose from ancient foundations. See, long before American settlers arrived, the Hohokam had built complex canal systems that brought water to the desert floor. So many of those ancient waterways now lie buried beneath Phoenix. In 1868, a settler named Jack Swilling saw the opportunity in the ruins. He revived the Hohokam canals to irrigate crops, helping establish the city of Phoenix. So Jack Swilling became a local hero, an enterprising frontiersman who turned desert dust into farmland. His irrigation company flourished, and for a time so did he. But Swilling's story took a darker turn. Despite his early success, he struggled with addiction, and he eventually died broke and in jail, falsely accused of a stagecoach robbery. It's a crazy story. His fate was a grim reminder that while some profited immensely from the boomtowns and land rush, others were left behind. See, the arrival of the railroads marked the start of growing economic divides that would only deepen as the region modernized. Meanwhile, in Albuquerque, the railroad sparked the rise of an upscale district built around the new train depot. This new Albuquerque, as it was called, became a wealthy enclave, quite literally on the other side of the tracks. Even today, that area remains noticeably more developed than its surroundings, and it all traces back to the arrival of the railroad. So the railroad didn't just bring people and money, it also eventually brought statehood. With stronger ties to the rest of the country, Arizona and New Mexico finally became states in 1912. The Wild West was ending, and the modern Southwest, the sprawling landscape that we know today, was just beginning. But turning dusty frontier towns into lush havens for wealthy retirees would take more than infrastructure. It would take a brilliant marketing campaign, one that painted the Southwest not just as a place, but as an idea. But first, let's turn this idea into a finished painting. I'm pretty happy with the way that there's a lot of light in this painting. What I want to then focus on is some of the starker contrast. So what I'm doing is I'm going through and I'm thinking about places where I can put in some really intense shadows. And I feel like that gives it depth and it makes the painting more dynamic. I really want the eyes to focus on those lawn chairs or whatever they are, like the recliners that sit by the pool. And I want them to just shine through as if they're reflecting the white hot light. And so as long as I don't mess with the balance of white and the amount of light, but instead just focus on strategically placing shadows, I think I'm in pretty good shape for one of my better paintings. Let's find out. So after Arizona and New Mexico gained statehood in 1912, local governments set out to make the region feel less remote and more desirable. The Fred Harvey Company led the charge, building hotels, restaurants, and gift shops along the Santa Fe train line, marketing the Southwest as a land of native mystique, clean air, and endless sunshine. Elegant stops like La Fonda in Santa Fe and El Tovar at the Grand Canyon turned practical train depots into upscale destinations for wealthy tourists. And then came the Arizona Highways magazine, which was launched in 1925 by the State Department. With beautiful photography and romantic prose, this magazine reached millions of subscribers worldwide, selling Arizona not just as a place, but as a lifestyle. Meanwhile, national parks and monuments helped rebrand the region. So the Grand Canyon became a national park in 1919, followed by the Petrified Forest and then the Saguaro National Park just south of Tucson. So suddenly, the desert wasn't just something to survive, it was something to admire, even build a life around. And the plan was working. So by mid-century, Arizona and New Mexico were booming. Industries like mining, aerospace, and tech took root. Retirees and investors poured in. Wealthy East Coasters built winter homes in Tucson. They funded art colonies in Santa Fe, and they snatched up desert land while it was still cheap. So Phoenix tripled in size between 1920 and 1950. Tucson and Albuquerque doubled their population and then doubled again in that same time. So for over a century, the Southwest was sold as a land of climate and comfort, a haven from cold winters and crowded cities. And that promise still draws people in. Today, more than 95% of Arizonans live in metro areas like Phoenix and Tucson. In Nevada, 98% of people live in cities, which is the highest of any state in the country. In recent decades, millions of Americans, especially retirees and remote workers, have moved to Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada, and parts of Texas, chasing sunshine, comfort, and low taxes. But that dream comes at a cost. Luxury developments, golf communities, and air-conditioned mega mansions now line the desert. Scottsdale alone has over 200 golf courses, consuming millions of gallons of water in a region where rainfall is measured in inches. This new wave of migration has driven up house prices, strained water systems, and widened the gap between those who can afford the dream and those who can't. In cities like Phoenix and Albuquerque, housing costs have outpaced wages, pushing longtime residents out to the margins. Culturally, the Southwest is shifting too. The image of that rugged, Wild West self-reliance is fading, and it's being replaced by gated enclaves and seasonal snowbird communities, neighborhoods that fill in the winter and empty during the sweltering summer months. So what began as a story of survival and ingenuity, of ancient canals and adobe homes built to breathe, has turned into a classic case of American scale. And in the process, we've lost sight of what made the Southwest livable in the first place, that mindset of adaptability. See, long before the Europeans arrived, indigenous people like the Hopi, Zuni, and Hohokam developed ways to survive within the scarcity of the desert, planting deep-rooted crops, harvesting rain, and building communities that adapted to the changes in the landscape. The Spanish brought missions, plazas, and a new social order, and then the US added railroads, prospectors, and industry. But the 20th century boom showed what happens when comfort becomes the ultimate goal: air-conditioned sprawl, imported water, and golf courses in the desert. And yet, the spirit of adaptability isn't totally gone. In 2023, Phoenix appointed its first ever chief heat officer to help residents survive brutal summers. Over the past 20 years, Las Vegas has actually reduced its total water use by more than 25%, despite adding nearly 1 million more residents. So Vegas actually has water police who patrol neighborhoods for leaks and overuse, and they offer cash incentives for swapping grass lawns with native desert plants. This mindset, where sustainability meets adaptability, is what cities of the future will need to survive. If we listen to the Southwest's first peoples who knew how to build with the land, design within its limits, and focus on adaptability, then maybe tomorrow's booming cities won't repeat the mistakes of the past. If the Southwest has taught me one lesson, it's this: survival doesn't come from conquering your environment. It comes from respecting it and learning how to live with it. And I am going to learn how to live with this painting because I was going to say I don't like it, but I think I do like it. I think I captured that feeling. Going back to what I said at the beginning of this video, I wanted to focus on capturing the feeling over capturing what I see. And so if you look closely, there are areas where the lines aren't totally straight, or there are areas like these flower pots here where it's not really clear that it's a flower pot, but your brain kind of fills in the gaps. And I'm actually pretty happy with that. If there's one critique I have from learning how to paint a scene like this, it's that I think I could have been more thoughtful about everything happening down below. So you can see this sort of lip of the pool here and then this elevated ledge. And to be honest, I didn't really know what I was doing when I started painting that. I just kind of freestyled it. And when you look at the painting, I think that stands out as sort of like a sore thumb in the whole thing. Like, it just doesn't really fit with everything else. With a little bit more planning, I probably could have come up with a better way to utilize that space. But in any case, I enjoyed painting it and it was a good lesson. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'd love to know if you like these types of videos where I talk about not one specific event, but maybe like the evolution of an entire region, or try to cover more history and how it leads into the world today. So let me know in the comments what you thought, and thank you for watching. I will see you next time on Painting the Past.